All right, hello and welcome everyone to our week on music and counterculture. And before I get into everything, I just want to let you know that we do have an updated schedule that I want you to take a look at. So you do have an updated schedule that you can check out. It is in your syllabus and what is it? Syllabus and orientation section. But you'll notice in purple there are a couple new due dates and arrangements in the schedule. And so the soundtrack analysis is going to be in a separate video, and be on the lookout for that. It should be posted tomorrow. Okay, so there's that. So we are talking about films that are well, not just films, but we're talking about the use of music and an original score in films, television, and video games. Though most of my examples are from film, I do have at the very top, well, I do have a handout for you that is all about the various types of music used on a soundtrack and its basically its functions, and then even breaking it down even more. So when we think about music in film and in television and in video games, they have many different forms and functions. And I have here some basic terms that we've already talked about a lot of this, but just, going into it a little bit more intense. So we should already know what diegetic and non-diegetic is. But primarily when we think of non-diegetic music, we think of this is music that's outside of the film or television shows diegesis or story. Film scores are traditionally a form of non-diegetic music. And when talking about film score, a lot of times, especially in the history of analyzing film, a lot of times film score was referred to not only as non-diegetic music, but also as functional music, background music, and pit music. When we think about film score styles, and this still also translates to television and also into film, we have your traditional classical film score. And this is your leitmotif-laden orchestral scores that are typically neo-romantic or in a modernist style. Your John Williams is definitely a traditional classical film score. And even your older score composers like Max Steiger would be thrown into this. When we start talking about pop scores basically use pop idioms into the score. So this is when you start to incorporate jazz, pop music, hip hop, and some of these might incorporate song forms into the score, but it still gets its point across and gives you a sense of again, the type of music or the type of feel of the film or television show that you're watching. And then a compilation score is made up of pre-existing songs, previously existing recorded music. So this can be pop songs, this can be rap songs, but this can also be classical music, techno music, music from other films. Quentin Tarantino is definitely one of those directors that's known for the use of the compilation score. The first time that he actually had an original score written for his film was The Hateful Eight. And he did use Morricone, but he did use themes from other scores as part of his compilation scores in many of his previous films as well. So that's a great example of that. When we think of diegetic music, it's music that emanates from within the story, within the film, television show. So this can be people performing, whether they're in a rock band. This could be people just singing along to the music on the radio. This could be them putting a record on the player and listening to it together. So basically, it's a performance, or it's coming from a source. So coming from a CD player, a jukebox, that sort of thing. One of the things that is unique about music is that it can float in and out of the diegesis. So this could be where you're watching a film or even watching a television show and you think that you are just listening to a song that's being used non-diegetically, and then all of a sudden you realize that, oh, it's a band actually playing, or the character is listening to the music that you hear on screen. So this is one of those unique instances. And then a few things when we think about leitmotifs. This is the most common element in film music, in when we're talking about the score. Basically, this is a theme or phrase associated with a specific character or idea. And a lot of times this becomes a trademark within the score. This also can function by giving you a sense of emotion. It also, symbols that can be easily identified as well. Melody, similar to leitmotif. In tonal sequence, it is easy to listen to, singable, and expressive. It is memorable and recognizable as a discrete unit. So basically, if I just, do something like dun 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 dun, okay, we know that is the Jaws theme, and Jaws is going to be coming. Dun 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 dun, Imperial March. So these are things that are definitely memorable, and when used correctly in a score. And yes, John Williams will be mentioned a few times in here. So yes, John Williams is definitely one of those. In our first lecture, we had the Jaws and we had the 5 tones from Close Encounters. Now, when talking about the different functions of sound, and these functions are both for score, and this can also be translated into the use of popular music or or songs. But when we think about it, the first one is commentative. And commentative usually is that the music either works in parallel or synchronized with the image, or it is a counterpoint. It can also be what is referred to as counterpunctual. So a lot of times, if you're watching a horror film, you're going to have music that reflects that you're watching a horror film. If you are watching a romantic comedy, and then all of a sudden, in that moment that we're supposed to have, what would be like the romantic moment where they're kissing, and we hear from Psycho, that is a counterpoint. And it might be commenting on the relationship, definitely, or uses humor, depending on how it's, the type of movie. Conveying time and space. So you're in an old-timey Western, you might have, piano music going on. If you are, in the late 1960s, hippie scene, you're going to have and maybe especially in California, you're going to, hear the Mamas and the Papas. You're going to hear you'll probably hear some Beach Boys, but you might hear some, Steppenwolf and some other, or Steppenwolf, not Steppenwolf and some other more psychedelic rock type of music. And that's another, like Vietnam movies. You have, you know, the Doors is used a lot. So again, music from the primarily from the '60s, but there's a little bit of the '70s in there as well. Conveys psychological states of characters. So this can tell you if the character is all there or not. It can also tell you if they're happy, if they're sad. Signifier of emotions. This is for you. So this is where it starts to tug on your heartstrings, and so this could be like, oh, I'm tough. I'm not gonna cry at the end of Marley and Me, and then next thing you know, you're bawling like a baby. I would like to assume that Marley and Me has music that tugs at your heartstrings, and not just because it's the longest death scene in the world. Yes, I said that. Marley and Me. So, but basically, signifier of emotions. It will tell you to be scared. It will tell you to be anxious. This is what good music will do for you. Continuity and editing. Fight sequences can be really, really boring if you don't have the music, so it helps bring everything together. It can give scenes a sense of finality. It can add or create color. Basically, it can make a scene seem brighter, happier. Give it more than what maybe is just there in the image. And then it can just be background filler. And most good soundtracks today, both scores, try not to be invisible or inaudible. But this is one of those things where a lot of very early soundtracks were subordinate to the visuals and to the dialogue. It can be used for narrative cueing. So basically, the music can give us a sense or a point of view of a character. If you recall back to the opening of Taxi Driver that I have, we have the music, is jazzy, but at times it gets a little bit more romantic. And so these are, this is, almost a cue of how Travis sees himself, as the hero in his story. And so it can give you a point of view in addition to established settings and character. So in this case, it's definitely referential. Or even like a show like Westworld, where we have the music tell us if we're in the park or we're outside of the park. And it really plays with that as well. Or which park are we in? So when we are in Samurai World and when we are in Westworld, we've got two different interpretations of Paint It Black, and that tells you which world we're in. And then connotative, basically, this is where the music is used to interpret or illustrate certain narrative events. So again, it can reinforce that war is going on. It can reinforce that we've got a time limit. It can create unity or a sense of a musical concept. So can be done through the use of repetition. This can be used through certain types of instrumentation. And this also basically starts to create a sense of style and structure to the film. So this is one of those things where if you have a film that is about hip hop culture, you're probably going to have a lot of hip hop music in it, and it might seem weird all of a sudden in the middle to have a country like, uh, score piece or something. So in terms of unity, you want to, you establish a type of style, and then it can also create an additional character. And in the case acoustometra, which is basically music, can give you a character that is imagined or ghost, can be created through music. And then when we talk about pop music or songs, especially those that we're familiar with, they have their own functions, almost in addition to what score has. Okay, yes, they can give you a time period so that we know, okay, we're in the 60s, we're in the 70s, we're in late 70s New York, hanging out at CBGB's, during the punk scene. It can be used to comment on characters. Uh, Lyrics can give voice and to the feelings and attitudes of the character or characters on screen. So the lyrics can actually speak for the characters, or speak for the moment, can give you more, and also give you more information than maybe what the characters are willing to do. And then also it has a sense of giving you either intertextual, extratextual, or a sense of musical illusionism. So basically, music can be used to flesh out characters, it can provide themes, communicate also on multiple different levels of meaning, depending on the audience's knowledge of the music. So if you're more familiar with the music, you might be able to connect different things to it. So, so that's kind of the breakdown of the handout that you have, which is just under the lecture. So make sure that you look at that. But the first clip that I have for you is the top 10 scores of all time. And this basically just talks about actual score, so non-diegetic music, though there are a couple examples of compilation scores. And it talks about the different ways scores are used. So this is, again, a nice, grouping of a variety of different scores and how they can be used. But at number 2, it goes into a great deal about John Williams, and John Williams as a composer, and especially his use of themes and his leitmotifs. So definitely pay attention to that in the discussion of John Williams and Empire Strikes Back. So I will give you a chance to watch the top 10 scores of all time. So you had a wide variety of different types of scores there, and definitely differentiating between what we're talking about in terms of a soundtrack as well. But before we get into soundtracks, let's get into some more current examples of the top 10 scores of the decade. And this goes into more contemporary composers, though Morricone does appear on the list. But we do have Hans Zimmer, Alexander Desplat, and Trent Reznor, and Atticus Ross, and of course another one, and I love them. So I could go on and on and on and about them. And Johan Johansson, oh my gosh, the fact that they mentioned The Arrival, oh my gosh, I'm so happy. But some of these composers I'm going to be discussing in more detail later on in the semester, but watch this, great examples. I love the fact that they start off with Black Panther, because again, another great example of a contemporary score and what you can do with it. And again, this is different from the soundtrack to Black Panther that featured music that was used in the film and also inspired by the film. So check out top 10 scores from the last decade with guest Junkie XL. So check that out. I'm sure that if you are totally into film, there's a lot of different scores on there that you might, want to add. So, unfortunately, yeah, we're not really talking about television scores, but there are a lot of fantastic ones out there, and this is definitely an area that, if there are some of these examples that you want to discuss, like you're really passionate about, say, oh, I said Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor, and you really love how the Watchmen TV series, how they did the score to that TV series. That's definitely something, uh, yes, that they've done fantastically. So, so moving on to soundtracks. So the top 10 soundtracks are all of all time are, for the most part, your compilation score, basically previously released songs or songs that were written for the film, but they're songs. So these soundtracks also give some of the functions and how these soundtracks work within the context of the film. But this, for the most part, again, takes a look at beyond the score. So we're looking at the whole, like, what would become the soundtrack album when it was released, and definitely talking about also other directors that utilize things like the compilation score, like Kubrick. So like 2001 is one of those. Even good chunks of The Shining is one of those where he uses, even though it's classical pieces, they are songs that have been or pieces that already exist. So check this out. It's a nice variety of 10 soundtracks of all time. So who knows? Some of your favorites might be on there. Some might not. It's one of those things where, yeah, that's from 18, and I know that there has been a tremendous amount of really great music that has been released in film, especially in the last couple of years as well. Now, the next one is the top 10 musical moments. And so this is going into detail about diegetic instances of music in film. So these musical moments in film are when either characters are performing or listening to music, that sort of thing. So these are instances where the music is heard by the characters or performed by the characters. So yes, how these musical moments work. This is not a musical. So yeah, for my musical fans, I didn't discuss the musical at all this week. So yeah, hate me all you want. But this also goes into great detail about the different types of musical moments in film, and also some great examples. So check that out. Okay, this next clip was mentioned in your top 10 musical moments, and it is one of those directors that is known for using music in his films. And this is an example of using music as, as a counterpoint, or music that doesn't really quite match the tone of the scene. And this is from Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. This is the Stuck in the Middle with You sequence. And yeah, so this is where we have the torture sequence, and I'm totally going to forget the character's name. It's not Mr. Orange, I know that. But so we've got this basically very sadistic torture sequence, but before, I'm going to do a little torture, but I'm going to dance to this, happy song from the 70s. And, you know, and the mood is upbeat, but the screaming, oh, the screaming. And so definitely this, you know, is a way to work as a counterpoint of what you expect to be used in the film. I watched a film the other night with Keanu Reeves as a serial killer, and he's dancing to, you know, White Zombie and stuff like that. That seems like I'm torturing, you know, someone I'm about to murder. You dance to White Zombie and you kill them with that. So, uh, other counterpunctual types of use of music within the scene is, of course, the singing in the rain song and dance number in Clockwork Orange. Uh, yeah, taking such a wonderful song and for, you know, basically rape and torture. Mm-hmm. So, and again, it's not always that way. It's not always like a happy song being used for violence, but with Tarantino, that's definitely one of his MOs. He uses music as also a distancing um, device. The same thing with humor. He will have extremely violent scenes, uh, but a lot of times scored to a really hip soundtrack. And this is a way at times to either soften the blow a little bit of the torture sequence or not. Oh, and just FYI, this version of this, and there are two versions of this scene. This is the version where the camera pans away during the ear cutting sequence. So, yes, there is another version where you actually. So, Stuck in the Middle with You from Reservoir Dogs. So, check it out. Oh, I don't know why you came here tonight. Oh, okay. Lyrically, you can see how the song still works in the scene. But I'm gonna just give you you know, a little, you know, little thing to tell you that in the film Reality Bites with Ethan Hawke and Winona Ryder and Janine Garofalo and I think Steve Zahn and Ben Stiller. They have a scene where they're dancing in a convenience store. And originally, they wanted to use Stuck in the Middle with You. But because it had already been used in Reservoir Dogs, they didn't want to have that connotation of characters, you know, having fun dancing in a convenience store while they're using a character's mother's, you know, gas card, but, you know, because it's an emergency. So instead they use My Sharona by the Knack. But we won't talk about the problems with using My Sharona, especially if you know the history of the fact that it's about being in love with an underage girl. But so the whole concept of musical illusion is, you know, basically if a piece of music can have additional layers of meaning or be associated with something. In the case of Reality Bites, they decided not to use Stuck in the Middle with You because it had been used too quickly, or, you know, not enough time has spent between the torture sequence and when that film came out. Though I still have a hard time with you know, with that song being used, you know, when Burger King used it a few years ago. And also your one of the clips talked about also in M the use of you know, In the Halls of the Mountain King, which you didn't really get to hear it, but in the film M, the child murderer, when he has the compulsion to murder, he whistles. So, this piece of music, which is from the Peer Gynt Suite, and so it's also referred to as In the Halls of the Goblin King, but basically a monster the connotation of a monster. And I connote child murderer. So when I see a frozen pizza ad using that piece of music, I think murder and monsters. So I attach, additional layers of meaning to the film or to the use of that music. And that's one of the dangers of using previous release songs, is for that. But let's go to something happy, shall we? So the next one is a clip from 500 Days of Summer. And this is a way how music is able to convey the psychological state of a character and also give you a sense of emotion. And so this is after our main character Tom has had sex with Summer. So, and all of a sudden the world is a happy place, and Hollow Notes, make my dreams come true, is the perfect soundtrack of I did it. I got to, be intimate with my dream girl, Summer. So check out this sequence and how it conveys not only his, but the music and lyrics convey his psychological state and his emotional state, but also it is infectious. It tells us how we're supposed to feel. So check that out. So now I've got the song stuck in my head. You make my dreams come true. This film was also done tremendously because as soon as the elevator closes, which is where the clip ends, it cuts to the next scene and he's miserable and it's gray and it's awful, and so his happiness is short-lived in this scene. But a great way that songs are able to use this. Another way that music is used as a way to convey time and space, especially for location. I have an example right here from the film The Third Man. And The Third Man takes place just at the end of World War II. It takes place in Vienna, and Vienna, Austria at this point is basically, you've got it being controlled by the United States, it's being controlled by Russia, Britain, and and probably Austria, but it's four different parts. France, was it France? And I feel really stupid that I can't remember the four places is being controlled, but the idea, it's just after the end of World War II, and so it's a place that is full of the black market, and things that are being counterfeited, and people are still struggling after the war. And so our main character, Holly Martins, comes to Vienna because his friend Harry Lime says he's got him a job, but Harry Lime, played by Orson Welles, is part of the black market, and he sells black market. Well, in this case, he sells black market medicine, but the use of the zither music. And when you watch this scene, it gives it not only a sense of space, so the zither is definitely an instrument that's associated with Austria and Vienna. It also gives it a sense of playfulness as well, especially as we hear a drunken Holly. He is being interrupted by someone that is following him, and then come to find out it's supposed to be dead friend Harry Lime, and there he is. So check out this zither music that is used to convey a sense of place, and used in the film The Third Man. And yes, Jack White did get the name of his company, Third Man Records, from this film. And though I'm not playing it, another Orson Welles film that influenced Jack White and the White Stripes would be Citizen Kane. And there's a whole song about Charlie Kane, and now I can't remember which White Stripes song it is, but quotes directly from that song from Citizen Kane. So there you go, a little White Stripes, Jack White, Third Man connection. All right, so now I'm getting into counterculture and the use of music. So really, when we're talking about film particularly, but even a little bit of television, for the most part, in you know, we had certain standards of what music was acceptable and used. And we didn't really have a lot of pop music used in film to really represent a sense of rebellion, especially youthful rebellion, and also start to represent youth culture and counterculture. We really don't start to have that until the 60s. And especially in the late 60s, where we start to have more and more films start to reflect the rebellion. And also documentary films that reflect this time and place. I know it might seem crazy to think that Bob Dylan is being part almost of a counterculture, but the Don't Look Back documentary. Yeah, Don't Look Back. Wait, no, it's not called Don't Look Back. Well, the D.A. Preminger documentary on Dylan, was considered ahead of its time. The Woodstock documentary on the Woodstock Festival, again, kind of an examination of the counterculture, especially when thinking about the hippies and the rock movement. So we start to have this represented in film, and though we have a couple examples of rock music here and there being featured in some films of the 50s. They were called jukebox musicals, and usually directed towards a youth audience. But really, we start to actually have the themes match the counterculture starting in the 1960s. And one of these films that really reflect this, and especially putting songs to the forefront and really utilizing a compilation score, would be in the film Easy Rider. And Easy Rider features a lot of music from the 1960s, and it represents the sense of freedom that our main characters have. It represents how they're not part of mainstream culture and society. And you definitely see this with the first two tracks in the opening sequence by Steppenwolf. We have The Pusher, and then we have Born to Be Wild. And both of these songs reflect the lifestyle of the characters and the type of a film that you're going to be watching, throughout this. And so check out this clip from Easy Rider. It's the opening featuring Pusher and Born to Be Wild. So believe it or not, the song Born to Be Wild was considered rebellious, and now it's shorthand for basically the adults trying to relive their youth. I've also seen it used for diaper ads as well. So it doesn't really connote a sense of danger, a sense of rebellion. Definitely not an association to hippies and drugs and that sort of thing. Speaking of drugs, Television did try to do this happy dance by attracting the youth audience by trying to have stories that try to reflect elements of the counterculture. And some of them can come across as quite humorous today, and even quite humorous at the time. So, the television show Dragnet, which was off the air for quite some time, came back in the late 60s and wanted to attract both the parents and the youth. And the first episode of their return to television is, well, it's basically when LSD was still legal, but the dangers of LSD and the story of Blue Boy. And how we have the traditional dragnet, the dun 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 dun. All right, so we have that do 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 that plays, but we also have, because also in the late 60s we start to have the incorporation of more and more of a jazz score, or jazz influenced, type of score in there. But we start to get more psychedelic in this influence of more psychedelic music in the music, and maybe a little bit more psychedelic jazz and more free jazz when we get later on in the sequence. So if you watch this scene, notice how the music changes, especially when they get to the acid party and the music that's playing. Oh, poor Blue Boy. He just went on the, boy did he trip. All right. So the final sequence and the final film, this is the film that traditionally for this chapter, for this week, this would be the film that I would be showing you in its entirety. But it looks like it's not on Netflix. It is, I think it's on HBO Max. It could be part of, I feel like it's part of TCM, but it looks like it's not going to be around much longer on HBO Max, and I know it's in some other places too. But I'm talking about The Graduate, and The Graduate was a film that definitely used music in a way to really express the feelings of a character. And even through the repetition of songs, it worked as a theme, but also continued to tell us not only what the character was feeling, but also the transition of the character, or comment on, the future of our character. So, Mike Nichols, who directed Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and he also was on stage and screen. He was a comedian beforehand, but when he started to get into filmmaking, it was pretty shocking that his second feature-length film completely gave over a lot of the film in certain sequences, the soundtrack completely over to songs by Simon and Garfunkel. And some of these, and when you think about The Graduate, there's a character called Mrs. Robinson, and you think, oh, the song by Simon and Garfunkel, Mrs. Robinson, was already around, and so it they kind of made the character around that song. No, in fact, the song Mrs. Robinson didn't have the lyrics yet, and they were still working on it during this film, and it wasn't released in full until after the film. So, the Mrs. Robinson that's being sung about in the Simon and Garfunkel film is not necessarily the same Mrs. Robinson, though there's elements of it for sure. But the song that's repeated over and over and over again, and one that speaks a lot to the character of Benjamin Braddock, played by Dustin Hoffman, is Simon and Garfunkel's Sound of Silence. And Sound of Silence, lyrically, tells you a lot about the character, especially in the fact that people don't listen to him. People don't hear him. And even if he's loud, he's still not heard or not noticed. And yeah, again, it's strange to think that Simon and Garfunkel, a folk band, at one point was part of, the counterculture, part of like the folk music scene, especially in New York City. And then here we have the film taking over these songs that are able to speak about the angst that is in our main character. Now, this is a character, Benjamin Braddock wants to do something new. He wants to rebel against his parents. He wants to rebel against the generation before him. And he's trying to do something different with his future. And so his act of rebellion is still within a frame of privilege, but it is one of those things where even as a recent college graduate, he doesn't have a sense of agency at this point. He is still not heard by his parents. He's still not heard, by anyone. They don't listen to him when he says he wants to do something different. They want him to stay on the path that he was born to be on. So, the first sequence that we have is the first time we hear the Sound of Silence. And this also is a way of, if you listen to the lyrics, it matches his drifting. And he's on the, he's in the airport and he's on, basically, what is it? It's not the automatic walk, but basically the walkway that moves for you. And he is, we've got movement, but he is not moving. We are moving forward, but he is actually staying in one place. And then the ends, the scene kind of ends and we see him smiling, but that's deceptive on the lyrics that we hear. So here's the first time that you hear the Sound of Silence. So check it out. All right. So as you can hear, especially how, the lyrics commenting on how, even though he's not saying anything in this scene, how he has something to say, but nobody's listening to him. And this is going to be a constant theme in the film. This next scene is the continuation of him drifting, but this is where Mike Nichols completely turns over the soundtrack to two Simon and Garfunkel songs. And this is where we hear Sound of Silence again, and we hear the song April Come She Will. And it's a montage sequence of Benjamin, who at this point is now in a relationship with Mrs. Robinson. Mrs. Robinson is a friend of his parents. His dad and Mr. Robinson are partners, business partners, and Mrs. Robinson is the older woman that Benjamin starts to have an affair with. And the sequence again comments on how both he's still drifting, and so you see him drift on the pool, and how he drifts through his affair with Mrs. Robinson, and so this montage sequence, shows that. But the music also reflects again that continuation, that people aren't hearing him. Even with Mrs. Robinson, she doesn't really listen to him. Even though this is his current, this is his current part of his life, and he's still not moving forward. He hasn't gone forward at all. But it's the second song in here that also is pretty reflective on what's going on. Now, initially, when you watch the scene, and if you listen to the lyrics, even just the name, April Come She Will, it's kind of like a little double entendre, especially since it's about the affair between him and Mrs. Robinson. So hopefully, hopefully somebody will take pleasure in this. But the song goes through the various months, and it's actually about the beginning, middle, and end of a relationship. And so it speaks to how the relationship between Benjamin and Mrs. Robinson at the end of this sequence is going to be coming to an end. Though it hasn't ended yet in the sequence, in the next major scene is the beginning of the end of their affair. So lyrically, the music is again the frustration of nobody hearing Benjamin not moving forward with the sound of silence, and then April Come She Will is a piece of music that is used lyrically to express that the relationship has run its course. So check that out. And also, usually when I show the whole thing, the first, the beginning chords of the Sound of Silence happens at the end of the previous scene, where Mrs. Robinson has just challenged Benjamin's manhood and slams the door, and the music starts, but we have a fade to black, and we've got the Sound of Silence. Usually get chuckles because, hello darkness, my old friend. It is basically usually got some laughs. So I don't think that was initially intended by Mike Nichols, but it is fun when that happens. Probably not, doesn't work as well here because you don't have the lead up and the tension and her emasculating him a little bit. So watch the scene. So as you heard in the lyrics, definitely in the April Come She Wills, you can hear that it's about the relationship coming to an end. So the end of the film, and one of the reasons for the end of the relationship, is that Benjamin now wants to move forward and wants to have a relationship with Elaine Robinson, Mrs. Robinson's daughter. And this is something that she does not want, and forbids both Elaine and Benjamin of having this. But no. And as you'll see in this scene, this will be the final time that we use the Sound of Silence, but we also have the fact that you will see that Elaine just got married to someone else. So I'm going to let you watch the scene, and then I'm going to talk about it in just a moment. So so watch the final time we hear the Sound of Silence. Okay, so I hope you laughed at the use of the giant cross that Benjamin used as a way to, get away everyone. But we see them, they get on the bus, people are staring at them, they're happy, and then we have this, they are looking at each other, looking away from each other, and it's like, oh shit, what have we done? So whereas they won the battle against their parents, and both Elaine is in the same boat as Benjamin, in the fact that she is trying to do something different from her mother and her father, but they didn't listen to her, and so they forced her into getting married. But it was, so she wasn't being heard, and Benjamin, finally, took it on upon himself to have some agency and move forward, and took Elaine with them. So finally, hooray, they've rebelled against their parents. But now what? And so the Sound of Silence, this final time, comments on, are they not going to listen to each other? They're going to be silent at the very end of the sequence. Can they live with this silence? Will they listen to each other? What kind of a relationship are they going to have? So we have both a happy, sad ending, especially with the use of the music, and the fact that it's not the most hopeful ending once you take that into consideration. In that it was a brief winning the battle, but now what? Now what? So there were a lot of other examples that I wanted to give you that also had to do with counterculture, but of course there weren't any great clips for me to pull from. But that's okay. I think the lecture has gone on long enough, and I have a lot of great examples. And also, from the top 10 clips, there's a lot of things also to work with, as well. So in your course, in your discussion board for this week, that will be available at the start of Monday, you are going to do a couple things, because I want you to have a better understanding of music that can be used in film, television, and video games. So the first thing I want you to give me an example of a television show, or video game that has a musical score that stands out to you. Describe the score. So basically, is it a traditional classical score? Is it a hip-hop score? Is it a pop score that has some hip-hop elements? Is it an electronic techno score? So what kind of score is it? Why does this score stand out to you? Why did you pick it? Explain that, and give an example. Give one of the examples of the score functions as outlined in the handout. So basically, one of these guys, okay? And basically, explain it. Then you're going to share a clip that has diegetic use of music in a film, television, or video game. What makes it diegetic, and explain. It's supposed to explain how this piece of music functions within the scene clip. I have to fix it. I wrote who. How. And then the third part of the discussion is, what are the functions of pop songs in film? It's down there. Give an example of one of these functions from a scene in a film, TV show, or video game, and describe the scene and the function. So there you go. So based on this updated schedule, next week we will be discussing realism on the soundtrack. So stay tuned for that for next week. Until then, enjoy music on film, television, and video games, and all the various ways that it's used.